Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another edition of Friday Night Live on Friday, the 17th of November, 2023. I'm your host, Abdul Akbar, and as the clock ticks towards the weekend, we're here to deliver a blend of thought-provoking discussions and insightful analysis, all with a touch of Friday night charm. As always, our goal is to enlighten and talk facts tonight, bringing you the pulse of current affairs without any candy floss or mitai wrapped around the topics. We have an action-packed show for you, of course, and we are beaming out to the good people of Luton and surrounding areas tonight, and also to the good people of Sheffield, Nottingham, Derby, Peterborough, and across the Midlands through our partner stations across the UK. So welcome to all of you tonight. This is Friday Night Live with me, Abdul Akbar, and tonight, in our first power-packed hour, we delve into the topic at hand that's as complex as it is critical. That is the Palestine-Israel situation. And I'm asking the question tonight, what will it take for the UK to call a ceasefire? And joining us to unravel this intricate web are voices that resonate with expertise and experience. And we have Kerry Bullivant from Cage, Ismail Patel from Friends of Al-Aqsa. We're also later on joined by Adam Shapiro, the Director of Advocacy and Israel-Palestine at Dawn, and also Dr. Anas Takriti, CEO and founder of the Cordoba Foundation, and also we're joined by Professor Kamal Hawash, a British-Palestinian academic. Together, we're going to be exploring the nuances of this ongoing conflict, the role of the UK, and the pathways to peace. But after that, in the second hour of tonight's program, we're going to be switching gears slightly to a topic that's stirring the UK political scene right now. That's Suella Braverman. I don't know about you, but when I heard that Suella got sacked, I was like, Alhamdulillah, that's one less nutcase, one less right-wing nutcase that we have to deal with in this country. But the question is, it looks like she's going to be the next conservative leader. I hate to say it. And, you hope that leadership in mainstream political parties are going to have moderate voices or balanced voices or voices that will bring the people of this country together. Not Suella Braverman, no. I mean, she literally got sacked by Rishi Sunak at the beginning of this week. And what did she do? She literally had a massive attack against him the following day, and she's blaming him for all the situations. And you know what? I blame him too, because he shouldn't have hired her in the first place. I mean, she was sacked previously from Liz Truss, who only had a very short tenure as Prime Minister. But then Rishi Sunak came in and rehired her again for the same job. So he is as guilty as the rest. But we're going to be asking the question whether Suella Braverman is going to be the next conservative leader and what that means for social cohesion in this country and social just togetherness. It just seems like if this woman becomes the head of a major opposition party, she's going to cause more division than she already has done so. But we're going to be joined by the MPAC team, the Muslim Public Affairs Committee team, Taj Ali, a local journalist, and also Basharat Ali, who is an analyst and commentator from Amman Solicitors. We're going to be dissecting that topic in a little bit of time. So we're going to try to get our guests on the line, and we are going to be joining, we'll be joined for the first topic with Kerry Bullivant and also Dr. Ismail Patel, who I know is on the line. We're going to get him on in a second. Actually, before we do that, I do want to also share with you a really interesting article that's coming out on BBC News right now, which is their very famous news reporter, Jeremy Bowen. He's basically saying that the fact that the Israelis have gone into Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City means that they really have to show some proper evidence. And he has not seen proper evidence that Shifa Hospital is being used as a key Hamas command center. And that is the rhetoric that we're hearing from the Israeli government right now, which is that the Shifa Hospital, the Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, which was entered by the Israeli forces a few days ago, this news reporter, the BBC news reporter, Jeremy Bowen, he's a very experienced reporter in war zones. He is saying that he has not yet seen enough to indicate that the hospital, Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza, has actually a Hamas control center, but he is also keeping that door open. And it's really interesting for him to be saying this right now. And this is breaking news on the BBC News website. But I do want to go straight to our first topic of the evening, because it's the grounding for our discussion and in some crucial data paints the current picture of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Now, the situation in Gaza continues to be marked by a dire humanitarian situation and a complex geopolitical landscape, with international efforts focusing on alleviating the humanitarian crisis, but lacking a clear path towards a ceasefire or long-term resolution. Now, on the back of French President Emmanuel Macron telling the BBC over the last week that Israel must stop killing babies and women in Gaza, that's what he said. If you look at the UK stance, it's very different. Now, the UK has historically been more or less balanced between support for Israel and advocating for Palestinian rights, but that now is under scrutiny, and the question remains, what will it take for the UK to actively call for a ceasefire and take a more pronounced role in seeking resolution? I want to turn to our esteemed panelists who are on the line to delve deeper into this, and I'm delighted to be joined by a couple of them right now. We've got Kerry Boulevant from Cage and Ismail Patel from the Friends of Al-Aqsa. Let me start with you, if I may, Dr. Ismail Patel, specifically on the perspective of Friends of Al-Aqsa. What are the key obstacles in achieving a ceasefire, and how can international bodies, including the UK, play a more effective role? Assalamu alaikum, by the way.
Assalamu alaikum to you and all your listeners as well. Jazakallah for inviting me. I think it's quite a straightforward issue in one way, that the British public, almost 74%, are demanding a ceasefire, yet 80% of the politicians are demanding for continuation of the genocide in Gaza. And the reason for the politician to continue is because of ideological and vested interest in Israel itself. More importantly, I think Britain wants to follow where America leads, and it will do whatever America is actually saying. In effect, surrendering its own moral and ethical values and principles to America. And that is, I think, very detrimental for future British international standing, and in particularly its role in the Middle East in the very near future. So I think it's very concerning of how our politicians are turning against the tide of the British public, against the tide of humanity, and working for Israel at the expense of losing so many lives in Gaza. And I think what we need
it's interesting, Dr. Ismail Patel, sorry to interrupt you, but I also want to call out the topic that you're mentioning there about our politicians, because as you know, there was a vote in Parliament a couple of days ago where MPs had a chance to actually support a couple of resolutions or amendments to the King's Speech. One was the Labour amendment, one was the SNP amendment. And you can argue that, yes, some members of Parliament may have been strategically against the ceasefire, but oh my God, there were actually Muslim members of Parliament as well, like Tulip Siddiq, like Nusrat Ghani, like Roshanara Ali, like Rehman Chishti, like Saqib Bhatti, like Shabana Mahmood, of all people, that did not support the ceasefire. I mean, what's going through their minds, would you say? What are they up to?
I use the word ideological in my introduction. And I think this is ideological and career politicians. Look, we've got several types of politicians in the House of Commons, whether they're Muslims or non-Muslims. One is career politicians who will sort of rub up the gravy train and try and get as high as possible without any principles or morals. And the names you have listed, I would put them, most of them in that category, that they don't really care about anything as long as their career is not jeopardized and their progress in politics is not being undermined.
I mean, they're not here to defend themselves, but they might say to you, Dr. Ismail Patel, that actually we are calling for humanitarian pauses, which is what the Labour Party is primarily saying, and Keir Starmer is primarily saying. Yes, maybe the majority of Muslim councillors in the Labour Party don't agree with Keir Starmer, but he's saying, I'm calling for humanitarian pauses. If we call for a ceasefire, that will effectively embolden Hamas, and it will allow them to regroup. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely not, because let's think of what that means. Humanitarian pause means let's wait for 4 hours or 10 hours or 2 days. Let's give people in Gaza a break, give them some food, and then kill them later on. Humanitarian pause doesn't make any sense at all in war. I mean, it only allows Israel to go and kill the people after they've had some food in their stomach. That is preposterous. And therefore, I don't accept that at all. On the second count, which is much more interesting and more important to understand, this very idea that if you have somehow a pause, Hamas will become emboldened. Well, Gaza is under siege. how will they get emboldened? How will they be able to bring arms from outside Gaza? Nothing can fly into Gaza. There's no ships that can dock into Gaza. There's no land access to Gaza. Nothing is able to get into them. So this very idea, physically, it's not possible. But more importantly, I mean, think about it of the long term. This idea that somehow Hamas is the problem. The real problem is the occupation. And what the Palestinians have done historically, going back up until 1947, 48, is to resist that occupation, whether it be Fatah, PFLP, and other groups. And therefore, Hamas is just one of those other groups that is resisting occupation. Even if you get rid of everybody from Hamas at the moment, the whole membership disappears. Do you think Palestinians will stop resisting?
All right, Dr. Ismail Patel, I'll come back to you in a second. Thanks for sharing your perspectives. Let me go to Kerry Boulevard. Kerry, are you on the line? Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. Kerry, let me ask you this question. Given Cage's advocacy for justice, how do you perceive the UK's current position on the Israel-Palestine war, and what steps do you reckon the UK government should take to facilitate a meaningful ceasefire? Right now, they're not taking any steps. What do they need to do to turn this around?
The first thing we need to do is, I mean, there was so much talk about Brexit and taking control of our own future and direction, but all they want to do is follow American policy, and let the Americans dictate our foreign policy. So Britain has an obligation in this situation to be a voice for peace and a voice for reason, and to be calling for a long-term solution to this situation. That means pushing the Israeli government to actually support a peace process, be it a one or a two-state solution, and to not just sit by and acquiesce and support and assist in the murder of thousands and thousands of children.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, what's interesting there is that if we had the UK government, and I've read the UK government's position on this, and I'm sure you have too, which is quite straightforward, they would argue, which is we do support a two-state solution, but Israel's had an attack. More than 1,400 Israelis have been killed, and therefore Israel has the duty to defend itself. What would you say to that?
Every single person of integrity can look at this situation and realize there is no proportionality in the defensive operations, air quotes, that they're taking. They have killed already upwards of 12,000 people now. Thousands and thousands of children dead. That's 10 to 1 on the terrible and horrific loss of life that the Israelis suffered. But they're carpet bombing a civilian population. That isn't solving the problem. That's just blood, seeking blood. That's just revenge. And that isn't going to be a solution to any of these problems. When you take an approach like this, where you indiscriminately bomb and indiscriminately kill, you're creating more feeling of hatred and resentment towards the Israelis than already existed, and making the situation harder to resolve, not easier. Unfortunately, I've been on a lot of the protests every week that have been going on in London, and one of the common cries is no justice, no peace. And it's true. Until there is peace in the land, and justice, there won't be peace. We won't be able to find that peace.
All right, I hear that. And then Kerry, you mentioned, I'm going to go to Dr. Ismail Patel again from the Friends of Al-Aqsa. Dr. Ismail Patel, Kerry mentioned the demonstrations. I mean, we saw one of the largest demonstrations last week, which I know, Dr. Ismail Patel, you've been at the front of, representing your organization and the interests of the Palestinian people. However, regardless of that size and magnitude of protest, nothing's been changed in terms of UK foreign policy with regard to the situation right now. As Kerry mentioned, 12,000 plus innocent civilians have been killed in this war. And it looks like Benjamin Netanyahu is saying, yes, we have killed people. And, this is Hamas's fault. It's not our fault. What was your reply to that? And what number of demonstrators will it take for the UK government to turn the situation around? Because I remember in the second Iraq war, demonstrating myself, and nothing changed with regard to foreign policy there. So are the demonstrations making a difference? And if not, then what do we need to do as a democratic country using the tools at our disposal to actually make a difference? Because right now, many people are feeling powerless.
Well, I think I have a slightly different assessment. I think there's been a major impact of the demonstration. I mean, let's look what internal domestic politics has happened. I mean, Braverman has gone because of the demonstrations. If there were no demonstrations, she would have not gone. The very fact that she started to meddle with us and then pushed the boat too far, she got caught in her xenophobia and discrimination and was ousted. So that's domestic. But internationally, and in reference to Gaza, I think there's huge changes. I mean, 3-4 weeks ago, there were 3 or 4 politicians in British Parliament who had supported Gaza and called for a ceasefire. Now we changed that to what we had over 125 people call for a ceasefire just 2 days ago. So that's a major shift. Of course, everything's not going to happen overnight. We can't expect miracles because we're trying to change very long historical alignment of the British Parliament with Israel, and we're trying to fully. But we need to come in, week out, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and we will be able to change. And regarding Iraq, I was also reading. Let me just say about Iraq first.
Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, about Iraq. I also led that demonstration, one of the individuals that led that. And we did change it. Yes, the war took place. 1 million people were killed in Iraq. But those who carried out those attacks have now become pariah. And you know, these kind of things are important because they cannot be repeated ad hoc and they cannot be repeated over time. And that's what's almost holding back Britain. And all the support that Britain has been given in the first week to Israel, that has been taken back. We hope that it comes quicker, and we hope we don't have to keep on coming out. But we need to come out more and more, week in, week out, until there's a ceasefire in Gaza, end to the siege, and end to the occupation.
Can I add something to that, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll be very quick, I promise. I think the point that the doctor made is very, very correct. If you just look the other day, 50 Labour MPs rebelled against their own leader to vote for a ceasefire. Where's that pressure coming from? That pressure is coming from the community, from these demonstrations, from the mass feeling that's been pushed out there. But I'll say this as well. We're not going to be held to account for whether the action that we take is successful or not, but we will be held to account as if we stood up and if we spoke the truth and if we held to justice on Yom Al-Qiyamah. And there's very little that I, as one person in the UK, can do for my brothers and sisters in Palestine. But I swear to you, I won't go down without shouting for them and speaking out for them.
Okay, thank you for sharing that very, very emotive insights there, Dr. Ismail Patel and Kerry Bullivant. But let me come back to you, Kerry, on this next topic. And it's the same topic, but another angle here, which specifically is about the posturing of the general consensus in the UK. I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm having to justify and protect Hamas here, and I shouldn't have to do that. It's almost as though anyone who condemns the innocent killing of innocent civilians in Gaza is a bad person and suddenly hates Jews and Israelis. I mean, what are you hearing on the ground?
Look, we can't get caught in this false equivalency and this straw man that is trying to be created for us. We're speaking out against the murder of innocents, and for me,
do you condemn the Israeli government? Do you condemn the Israeli government? Because that's what's being asked. Do you condemn Hamas? On the other end, I'm asking you, do you condemn the Israeli government?
I condemn the killing of innocents, yeah, and the people at the moment doing the vast majority of that are the Israeli government. Now, as Muslims, it's always going to be our position to stand on behalf of justice, and stand up for all innocent people. We need to understand the wider context of the situation in Israel and Palestine. And understand that the Palestinian people have been under occupation for 50 or 70 years, depending on where you want to start your count. People talk about the statement from the Justice to the Sea, Palestine will be free, and attempt to say that this is sort of anti-Semitic. And when you see people asked about it, they say, well, where will the Jews go? No one's saying that the Jews have to all be forced out. Unfortunately, we don't behave in the same way that was treated upon the Palestinian people with the Nakba. No one's saying to force anybody out. We're saying we want a peace and we want a land that can be sustainable. Not
thank you for sharing
abuse anybody.
Appreciate that. Dr. Ismail Patel, let me give you the final words here on this topic. I mean, Kerry, you just mentioned there this chant that has been popular in the demonstrations of late, the pro-Palestinian demonstrations, which is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What is your position on that?
Well, we have been chanting that for over 25 years at least. I remember going back as far as that. So this is nothing new. It has been instrumentalized by the pro-Israeli lobby and try and project it as anti-Semitic. But what it means is very simple, that everything between the river and the sea, those people in Israel itself who are living under apartheid, that should change. The occupation in West Bank, that should end. And the siege in Gaza, that should end. So yes, everybody between the river and the sea must be free. And it's a different type of freedom in that different areas.
Okay, that's very clear from your perspectives. I really appreciate your time. Kerry Boulevard from Cage and Ismail Patel from Friends of Al-Aqsa. Thank you so much for your time. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum. Appreciate that. That was Jazakallah khair. All right, so that was a really interesting topic then. Of course, if you listeners want to take part in tonight's topic, don't hesitate to also give us a shout. You can also take part on this program, 01582 481 822. Of course, I do have Zabsab in the studio. Assalamu alaikum, Zabsab. Let me make sure I got the right mic for you. I have got the mic, yeah. So Zabsab, what do you make of what our guests or our panelists just said there? What's your takeaways there?
Well, to be honest, I think first of all I need to commend at least Dr. Saab. I mean, Dr. Ismail Patel, he's been a campaigner for many years. I know it's difficult. I know he's had threats to his life. I know, he comes up against lots of sticks. So the fact that he's continuing is an inspiration. I think it's an inspiration, right, to the community to voice their opinions basically on this particular critical matter, to be honest, and the rights of Palestinians. And I think that the fact that voices have been raised in different forums has had an impact. We've seen movement on our elected officials locally. Both of them have
in Luton.
That's right. Yeah, both of them actually sort of resigned from their cabinet positions.
Shadow cabinet,
and we've also had movement on the council side as well. And some of them have actually signed up to the actual ceasefire declaration, etc. So. I think politics is working. Politics of peace is working, to be honest. And I think on many accounts, Israel is being called out as the aggressor.
See, I personally feel like it's not working, because when you look at that vote that happened in Parliament, the vast majority, if we're saying success is when a few MPs rebel against their leader, to me, that's not success. Success to me is when the majority of Parliament votes for a ceasefire. So if we're on the foot, and if the people who are pro-Palestinian or pro-life, I'm going to call it pro-life, because at the end of the day, anyone who cares about life will be concerned about the current situation, whether you're on the Israeli side or the Palestinian side or the Jewish side or the Muslim side. You are not going to want to see any more deaths, whichever side they are, humanitarian, pro-life. So anyone who's pro-life, I just couldn't understand it when I saw those votes. I was shocked that when those SNP and those Labour votes, those amendment votes came in, the vast majority of the House of Commons, the UK House of Commons, this is the UK. This isn't France or America. This is the UK. We're meant to be very sensitive to life and pro-life, but they're supporting the continuous killing. They've actually said, green light, Israeli government. We're happy for you to go and keep killing civilians.
Many of them are following party policy. As you know, the pro-Israel lobby has been very active for many years.
I don't think we can vote for any of them.
Well, for many decades, right? They've been very influential. And as the Al Jazeera documentary showed, right, that there have been the Israeli embassy has been involved in basically, in many ways, interfering with British politics, and they have been successful and are being successful. I think in many ways, Muslims are waking up to the fact that if they continue to be in this state of slumber, from a political perspective, their voices aren't going to be heard. And the fact that our vote has been toxified is beginning to hit us now, because the fact that none of the parties are willing to entertain our voice. And then that's a tragedy, really. And
I
we need
know.
to start working on that.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got Muslim councillors, you've got Muslim MPs, majority of them actually talking against this, resigning. Keir Starmer hasn't batted an eyelid. And he's going to be the next Prime Minister, potentially.
There's lots of...
We're going to wrap up for the break, as I said. We're going to continue this comment and this topic after the break. 01582 481822 listeners. Friday Night Live. Stay tuned. Do call us if you want to take part.
This program will continue after the break. Continue listening to Inspire FM. Inspire FM.
Inspire 105.1 FM.
My name is Hayat Bell. I'm a poet, a songwriter, and a child psychologist background, and a fitness and personal trainer also. Please continue to listen to Inspire FM on 105.1.
Did you see that guy on TV?
What, that no comment guy?
Yeah, he was sick. What was his name?
I think it was Atiq Malik.
Yeah, Atiq Malik of Liberty Law Solicitors. Atiq Malik heads up the criminal law team at Liberty Law Solicitors, specialising in everything from serious crime down to road traffic offences.
To find out more or for a free telephone consultation, call 01582 459955.
Liberty Law, there when you need us most.
Ideal Properties 20 साल से आपकी खिदमत में पेश आपकी प्रॉपर्टी की सारी जिम्मेदारी अब हमारी। हम अच्छी तरह से जांच पड़ताल करके किराएदार डालते हैं और आपको किराया बर वक्त गारंटी के साथ दिलवाते हैं। अगर आप प्रॉपर्टी किराए पर लेने या फरोख्त करने का सोच रहे हैं तो आज ही हमारे तजुर्बाकार माहिरीन से राब्ता कीजिए 01582721110 या फिर 01582696050। Ideal Properties, आपकी मदद हमारा ऐन फरीज़ा।
Once Imam Bukhari was in the masjid and waited for everyone to leave so that he could talk to Mash'ar, who was a blind student. Once everyone left, Imam Bukhari began crying and begged the blind student to forgive him. The student was shocked and asked, "What for?" So Imam Bukhari answered, "Once I was narrating hadith to my students. You were enjoying that hadith so much that you were in the state of dancing and were moving your head and hands. All the other students started looking at you. I also looked at you and smiled at your actions. Since you cannot see, I fear that this may be a backbiting that I have done against you." The man replied, "Is that all? Of course I forgive you."
Top tips for this winter on Inspire FM. As the days are getting shorter, salah times are also changing. Make sure you're up to date with your salah times. For up-to-date salah times in Luton, WhatsApp the phrase prayer times to 0777 9481822 or visit our website at www.inspirefm.org. For more winter advice, stay tuned to Inspire 105.1 FM or visit our website inspirefm.org.
Since its launch, tens of thousands of Muslims have given zakat through NZF. We're the only platform with a national reach enabling you to give zakat to those who need it here. Across the country, Muslims are in need. Your zakat has the potential to change their lives. Just go to www.nzf.org.uk to calculate your zakat, choose how it's used, and keep updated about the impact it's having on the lives of Muslims where you live. NZF. Give zakat here.
Assalamu alaikum. Join us for a fair reflection where we discuss and critically look at various issues surrounding us locally, nationally, and globally around the world.
We will be talking to experts and giving you a platform where your opinion matters.
And remember, a fair reflection
where your opinion matters.
Tune in on Tuesdays between 6 and 7 p.m.
From the studios of Inspire FM, The time is now 6:30.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to part 2 of tonight's edition of Friday Night Live with me, Abdul Akbar, and Zafar Iqbal. We are talking about Palestine and Israel again, and we're asking what will it take for the UK to call for a ceasefire? Indeed, what will it take for the majority of Western countries to call for a ceasefire? We saw that the French President Emmanuel Macron, this is France we're talking about, the same France that has banned the headscarf in state schools, the same France that has banned the Islamic dress in state schools and government buildings. But the same France is also calling for a ceasefire right now in Israel. What's going on there, and what will it take for the UK to call for a ceasefire? We're going to be talking about this topic with an excellent panel of guests. Joining me in a moment is Adam Shapiro, the Director of Advocacy for Israel-Palestine at Dawn. We're also joined by Dr. Anas Degriti, CEO and founder of the Cordoba Foundation, and also Professor Kamal Hawash, a British Palestinian academic, is going to be joining us to talk about the nuances of this ongoing conflict. And in the second part of tonight's program, so stay tuned for this, we're going to be switching gears to a topic that's stirring the UK political scene right now. That's Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary that got sacked. Thank goodness for that. But I'm asking the question from around 7 o'clock tonight, will she be the next Conservative leader? You saw the kind of divisive politics that she was stirring up, not least around multiculturalism and suggesting that multiculturalism in the UK has failed, not least to suggest that being homeless is a lifestyle choice, and not least to suggest that the pro-Palestinian marches we've been seeing in the UK that have been growing by the week were labeled by her as hate marches. Oh my God, what's going on there? That's coming up in the second part of tonight's program, because my worry is she might end up as the next Conservative leader, potentially as the next Prime Minister. How do we manage that? How does the UK manage someone with such hate? That's coming up in a bit, but I do want to go straight to our next topic, and in fact, our first topic, which is joined by the multitude of guests that we have on the line, and I'm delighted to welcome them as well. And as I mentioned, the situation in Gaza continues to be marked by a dire humanitarian needs and a complex geopolitical landscape, if I can get my words out correctly. And the international efforts focusing on alleviating the humanitarian crisis are, frankly, very difficult, and they're lacking a clear path towards a ceasefire or long-term resolution. Now, as I mentioned, the French President Emmanuel Macron told the BBC over the last week that Israel must stop killing babies and women in Gaza. That's exactly what he said. But the UK stance historically has been balancing between support for Israel and also advocating for Palestinian rights. But that's currently under scrutiny. And the question remains, what will it take for the UK to actively call for a ceasefire and take more of a pronounced role in seeking resolution? I'm delighted to be joined by the panel that I mentioned earlier. And if we could have them in the studio on our stream, that would be really helpful. Thank you so much, producers. Pay attention, please. I'd like to get this show on the road. And let me go straight away to Adam Shapiro. Good evening or good morning or good afternoon, Adam. Not sure what time is your time, but good evening. Thanks for joining us. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us again on Friday Night Live. It's great to have you back on the program. And let me ask you this, considering your expertise, Adam, in advocacy for Israel-Palestine, what do you reckon are the main diplomatic hurdles in the way of a ceasefire from Western countries? I mean, what's stopping the US from coming out saying, hey, ceasefire, please, Israel? Because we know that if the US came out and said ceasefire, then we know that domino governments like the UK and others will probably follow the US's leadership here, but they're not coming out with a ceasefire. Anthony Blinken, the foreign secretary, is still not suggesting that. He's calling for humanitarian pauses. He's even gone so far as to suggest that Israel must not occupy Gaza, which seems there is a division between Israel and the Americans on this. But what's your take? What are the main diplomatic hurdles in the way of a ceasefire? Over to you.
Look, I really appreciate you having me on for the show, and I'll start off by saying, quoting one of the members of the SNP, Stephen Flynn, who asked in the parliament there, how much worse does need to get? And I think that's pretty much the fundamental question at this point that should be posed to policymakers around the world. We know there's going to be a ceasefire at some point. We know that the fighting will eventually be brought to an end, that this assault on Gaza will eventually be brought to an end. We even know, I would say, that the United States will eventually get around to demanding that from Israel. But I think the biggest hurdle, from what I understand from policymakers, and this, I would also preface this by saying, I don't know that it's necessarily an unfair question. I think it's in the set of circumstances that we have right now. The circumstances that we have right now, where Israel is conducting the massive assault that it is doing, is the problem and should have not been allowed to occur as it has. But at this point, I think the question really is what happens on the day after a ceasefire in Gaza? What does that look like? If there is a ceasefire, does that mean that Israeli troops stay in place in Gaza? I think that's an unacceptable situation. Does it mean that the blockade of Gaza continues and that this trickle of humanitarian aid continues as a trickle instead of what is absolutely needed in terms of just allowing people to have clean water, sanitation, food, medicine, all those basics? And then the bigger question about governance, and that's a longer term question for sure. But I dare say that until this point, there hasn't really been sufficient focus on trying to address that question about what does it look like for Palestinians living in Gaza in a situation where Israeli troops withdraw, and where it doesn't seem that the recognized Palestinian leadership has a inkling or a plan as to what to do in terms of Gaza either. We have not heard from the Palestinian leadership, I think, sufficiently in terms of what they would like to see in the aftermath of the situation. And as much as we protest the situation, the reality is that there is going to be a new day once there is a ceasefire, and there needs to be better preparedness for that. Even as we condemn Israel, even as we condemn war crimes, even as we demand investigations.
Yeah, I mean, what does life after the bombing look like? I hear you. I'll come back to you in a second, Adam Shapiro. Thank you for that analysis. Let me go to Dr. Anas Takriti. Thanks for joining us on the radio as well. And Dr. Anas, as a leader in the Cordoba Foundation, what do you think are the implications of the UK's actions and inactions, it could be argued, on the broader Middle East peace process?
Well, we have no place at the table anymore. There is no peace process. What peace process are we talking about?
I don't know if we can hear.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, I mean, what I was saying was that there is no.
I can hear you. Yeah, go ahead, please. Go ahead. Yes, we can hear you.
There is no peace process. I think that it's an illusion. I think it's in some people's deluded minds that there is any kind of peace process. The kind of bombardment that was unleashed by Israel over the past 41 years, making it the longest war in the Middle East, even longer than the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. So that kind of bombardment doesn't really tell of a partner that really is seeking peace or wanting peace. As for the United Kingdom, I believe that we have scuppered any last credits we have in terms of being any kind of broker, let alone an honest broker. So, what has happened over the past month and a half is that the dynamics have changed immensely. Our position as a nation is in crisis, not only in terms of our position on the world stage and our ability, our capacity, our aptitude to create peace, to broker peace anywhere in the entire world, but also, the position of our government with its own people is in crisis, and the legitimacy of the political decision in light of politicians who are supposedly learned in law, learned in humanities and the such, egging on a war crime to actually reach its finality is in itself something that we as British citizens need to really ask ourselves first and foremost before we ask the political class what legitimacy remains, and this, I believe, is a real crisis.
Yeah, it is indeed. Thank you, Dr. Takriti. I'll come back to you in a moment, but let me go to Professor Kamal Hawash. Thank you for joining us as well this evening. And from your academic and personal perspective, how do you assess the impact of the ongoing conflict on the Palestinian communities? I'm talking about in Gaza and also on the West Bank. And what role do you think the UK should play in alleviating the situation? Right now, all they're saying is they're going to send some money, and way less than the foreign aid budget to Israel at the moment. So the way kind of the UK seems to be softening this blow in terms of its position for a humanitarian pause versus a ceasefire is a bit more money to the citizens of Gaza. But what role should the UK be playing in alleviating the situation?
Well, I won't forget the first tweet by James Cleverly when on the 7th of October, in which he said, first of all, Hamas is a terrorist organization. This was a terrorist attack. Okay, it is prescribed in the UK, so that's accurate from his point of view, that Israel had the right to self-defense. But it was the third thing that really stuck with me when he said, Israel's security is the UK's security. It isn't England or Scotland or Northern Ireland or Wales. So for him he set the bar at that level. And once you do that, it means you can only support Israel. And that's what the government here has done since then. To talk about aid to the Palestinians is just so disrespectful and a form of denial of what is happening when we see Israel even bombing Khan Yunis, which is supposedly one of these safe areas in the south, obliterating children. I mean, the scenes are absolutely horrendous, and they are there for everyone to see. I suspect what Israel wants to do, the first question you asked of Adam was about, what would happen when I think Israel wants to empty the north, completely destroy it, making it impossible for people to go back. Because, of course, where would all the building materials come through from? From Israel. And therefore, it is about doubling the place with the highest population intensity in the world will become doubly so, because you move half the population into the south, and then it becomes so unbearable, and it is already, that people begin to think about ways to leave. And that's what is really, that's the end game. What Zionism is driving Israel to do is to say, we want the land without the people. And they will start with Gaza, and if they succeed, and here is the danger, then they will turn their attention to the West Bank through the settler terrorists, who are currently making the lives of Palestinians so miserable, who go on rampages and so on. So I think the dangers are huge for the Palestinian people and for the Palestinian cause. The UK, through its position, is certainly not putting itself in any position to be able to broker peace. And I know we're not talking about Suella Braverman, but even to describe British citizens going out in around 1 million last Saturday, going out and demanding a peaceful thing, a ceasefire. Because let's face it, the only way you stop Palestinians and Israelis dying is through a ceasefire that holds. What happens after that, it really is going to be very complicated. But at the very least, there should be an insistence that international law is applied. Now, the Israelis don't want that. And the Palestinians, when they look at what Israel does and believe it is operating the law of the jungle, don't believe there's any prospect of that. But
thank you for that.
At the moment is in a ceasefire to stop people dying.
I hear you. Thank you, Professor Kamal. We're going to come back to you in a moment. Let me go back to Adam Shapiro in the US. And good afternoon again to you, Adam. Thanks for staying with us and sharing your initial perspectives. Let me take it in another direction slightly, which is the Al-Shifa hospital. You've probably been following the news, and you saw that the IDF has gone into the main central hospital within Gaza. This is the place where everyone goes for supposed sanctuary. And now to see the pictures of IDF soldiers, Israeli soldiers going in and actually searching the place, there have been various kinds of information coming out where there's been shots fired, not just at this hospital, but other hospitals as well. And the Israelis are saying, and they're claiming, that this is potentially a Hamas control center. I mean, what's the latest that you understand of that? And how unprecedented is it for a war effectively to be taken into a hospital?
I mean, I think in terms of international law, it's quite clear. Hospitals are meant to be, protected under the law. Now, there are provisions for when a hospital potentially can lose that status, depending on the actions of the armed group or state that's using it for offensive capabilities. However, as I'm sure is being reported there as well, so far the evidence that Israel claims to have, and let's be clear, Israel did not present any evidence prior to going into the hospital. It claims that Hamas was using this hospital as a command center and conducting operations from the hospital complex. And yet, despite the Israeli soldiers now being there for, I think it's almost 4 days, let's say, all we have is a picture of one small hole in the ground. And somehow we're meant to believe, or supposed to believe, that this is, the height of, terrorist infrastructure, so-called terrorist infrastructure. I will go, I'll be here on the record and say, I believe this is going to be a weapons of mass destruction moment. That the claims of, that there are tunnels under Shifa Hospital is actually well known. It's well known because Israel built those tunnels when they occupied Gaza. And this was actually exposed in a 2014 article, I think by the Wall Street Journal, who looked into it. So that there is an underground facility in terms of what is down underneath this hospital, that was built by the Israelis. That somehow this was being used despite all the denials, despite repeated incursions that Israel has made into Gaza over the years. There's no evidence for it. They're not showing any evidence for it. And I believe in the end, this is going to be a weapons of mass destruction moment where all the claims will have fallen apart to nothing. And in this case, implicated is not just the Israeli military, the Israeli government, but at least here in the United States, President Biden has really put his neck out by repeating these claims confidently. And I think it's going to rebound on him and on American intelligence and on Israeli intelligence in very bad ways.
Thanks for sharing that. Let me go to Dr. Anas Takriti. Dr. Takriti, I mean, what's happening here is that in addition to the hospital, we saw that the Arab and Muslim leaders came together recently from the Arab world. Iran was there as well. It's interesting to see the pictures of the Iranian leadership and the Saudi leadership walking together and really almost holding hands in unison for the Palestinian cause. So those who say that Hamas was trying to create a separation between the various stakeholders in the Middle East may be surprised to see this, especially with all these Arab leaders coming together. However, there's another argument on the Palestinian side and on the general consensus side that what else are the Arab and Muslim leaders doing aside from making a bit of noise and saying they condemn the actions of Israel and the Israeli government. It seems the most outspoken is Erdogan, who's recently been actually in Germany today, I believe he was in. He's been the most outspoken verbally on the pulpit against the Israeli government's policies. But it seems the Arab Muslim world is generally impotent here. What's going on?
What's going on is the same that's been going on for 75 years. The Arab regimes are not only cowardly standing by and watching, they're actually complicit in the crimes committed by Israel. They are safeguarding the occupation. They are ensuring that Israel carries out mass murder in hope that the problem of Palestine ends one way or another. It's been sort of bothering them on their velvety sheeted beds for decades now, so they need to end this particular saga. So when in the past there was a lot of noise that sounded like chivalry or bravery or whatever, and then now we find out that every single one of them was in the pay of someone to basically sell out and sell off Palestine and the Palestinian people. Now they're not even, pretending. Now we have a normalization process that was in full swing up until the 7th of October, and I expect it to be back in full swing soon after. We have, countries that claim to be Arab, claim to be Muslim, that are rounding up imams and preachers who dare make a prayer or a supplication for the people of Palestine. We have marketplaces that are adorning the Israeli flag in Arab cities and capitals. And you know, whilst all this is happening, we have a festival in Riyadh where all sorts of malarkey is going on, whilst the children in Gaza are being slaughtered. So, to be perfectly honest, I think it's a waste of time to even consider what it is that the Arab and Muslim states are doing. You talk of Turkey, yeah, fine, in terms of being the best of the worst, but that's not really any kind of proclamation. I mean, Erdogan, whom I personally supported in the last round of elections, I think Turkish positions have been absolutely abysmal. I mean, the least they could have done is to withdraw their ambassador, to dismiss the Israeli ambassador, and that didn't happen. The least they could do is to say that
did they not expel each other's ambassadors? I think there was some
this
sort
was
of
last week. This was last week. After 4 weeks of people pleading with them to just do something. It's not even too little, too late. It's way too late. And
Dr.
it's not
Anas,
even too little.
appreciate that. I'm going to go to, thanks for those strong remarks there. I'm not sure everybody would agree with everything you just said there, but I hear where you're coming from, and that's definitely a point of view out there. Let me give the last words to Professor Kamal Hawash. Professor, what's your take on the situation from the Arab leaders as well? I mean, do you feel equally as strong as Dr. Takriti there?
Well, I mean, let's look at action. What has come out of all these meetings? Zilch, nothing. What could have happened, in my view, is that they should have come together, provided a convoy of trucks from all over these countries, and told Israel.
I'm pretty sure I've seen UAE trucks in.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about all these countries, and told Israel, these will go in, and if you decide to attack them, then that is a declaration of war. Because that is where we need to be. We cannot leave they can't leave the Palestinians alone against this killing machine. I mean, it is genuinely a killing machine. So what can they do? Yes, they've withdrawn the ambassadors, but surely aid should be going in to see two trucks of fuel going into the two. What are they going to do? I think in Al-Shifa, I heard 7,000 people had to share 300 sandwiches. And this is what we're talking about. It's horrendous. And so to sit in their ivory towers, in their palaces, and just sort of have a discussion, have a nice lunch, and then not even come to an agreement on anything is just so abysmal that it's embarrassing. I think that's where they should have set the bar at that sort of level, to say these must be going in, because 2.3 million, mostly civilians, half of them children, can't be allowed to starve, can't be allowed to go thirsty, and therefore you must let that in, and then we have a ceasefire, and we try and find a way forward. Because they keep talking about the hostages and so on. What about the 2.3 million prisoners that Israel has in Gaza? They must have aid and be able to start to recover. And as I say, the north of Gaza is going to be really, really difficult for them to access, but moves must be made to make sure that they can return. And then those same states, Western states that have been emboldening Israel, should realize finally that Israelis will never have peace and security until the Palestinians have their rights.
Wow, powerful words there. Let me go ahead and thank all three of my guests for this part of the program: Adam Shapiro, Dr. Anas Takriti, and Professor Kamal Hawash, whose voice we were just hearing from. Appreciate your time this evening, gentlemen, this afternoon. Thank you so much, and take care of yourselves.
Thank you.
Listeners, this is Friday Night Live with me, Abdul Akbar, and Zafar Iqbal Saab. Zafar Saab, I've got to say, some really strong words coming out there from our panelists, and clearly there seems to be like an agreed upon consensus there amongst this group that the Arab countries and the Muslim nations in general, including Turkey, are not doing enough.
Well, to be honest, I think Erdogan has made lots of noises, but this time I think, to be honest, Turkey has a lot to answer for in terms of the reasons why this particular war is happening, and what the reasons for this is happening is all to do with oil and gas pipeline to Europe. via Ukraine. So Ukraine war and the Gaza war are connected, and what connects the two is Turkey. And Turkey has actually paused that pipeline project. But in essence, to be honest, on the one hand, you shout words of support for the Muslim Ummah, and on the other hand, you shake hands with people who are murdering them. That doesn't sound like a recipe for strong leadership, to be honest.
Yeah, it's hard to read what Erdogan's policy is. I mean, I think he's playing to the local crowd. At the same time, he's also maybe covering his back as well at the same time in terms of what his perceived interests might be. But I find it very hard to read Erdogan. And yeah, as has been suggested, all talk and very little play in terms of the situation in Palestine. But maybe, but it's hard for us to say.
Other Arab countries, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
Much of the same. They're just waiting to see what happens. They're worried about Hamas more than they are about death of civilians.
Okay, we'll continue this topic and our next topics about Suella Braverman after these messages. Stay tuned, listeners. Friday Night Live.
This program will continue after the break. Continue listening to Inspire FM. Inspire FM.
Inspire 105.1 FM.
Top tips for this winter on Inspire FM. As winter approaches, the days are much shorter. This makes it easier for students to lose motivation in studying. When doing schoolwork, make sure you're in a relaxed and bright environment. This will boost your productivity and help you focus more. You can even tune into Inspire FM to listen to your favorite nasheeds while you're studying. For more winter advice, stay tuned to Inspire 105.1 FM or visit our website, inspirefm.org.
You are number 19 in the queue.
Tired of hearing this? Waiting weeks for an NHS appointment? Optimize Body and Mind put your health first.
I took a blood test and found out I was vitamin deficient.
That's right. Urgent GP appointments for just £45. Prompt, personalised care when you need it most.
I took a vitamin injection and now I feel like a new person.
Deal with symptoms, vitamin deficiencies, hormone imbalances, and pick up any early signs of illness. Put your health first with Optimised Body and Mind. Call us on 0333 012 4214 or visit optimisedbodyandmind.co.uk to book your appointment today. Your health is our priority.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من سام رمضان إيمانا واحتسابا غفر له ما تقدم من ذنبه. That whoever fasts Ramadan with faith seeking reward, his previous sins will be forgiven for him. Subhanallah.
Luton's most luxurious venue for Asian weddings is now bigger and better than ever before. With 2 venues to choose from, Venue Central can provide the ultimate setting for your wedding. 2 huge venues, 1 high standard, right in the centre of Luton. Visit us online today at venuecentral.co.uk or call us now on 01582 451 767. Venue Central, affordable luxury in a central location.
For the last 10 years, SKT Welfare, with your support, has helped millions of people who are suffering due to lack of food, shelter, water, and medical care in Pakistan, Syria, Africa, Yemen, Palestine, and Bangladesh for Rohingya refugees. Thank you. Without your support, we could not have achieved this. Please continue to help. Donate now. 0300 30 20 786 or www.sktwelfare.org. Just 85 pence a day could provide vital food.
बख्शिश तेरी आंखों की तरफ देख रही है, मोहसन तेरे दरबार में चुपचाप खड़ा है। मैं रोज गुल बज़्म-ए-नात के साथ आपकी खिदमत में हाजिर होता हूँ हर जुमातुल मुबारक सुबह 9 से 10 बजे के दरमियान। आप भी हमारे प्रोग्राम का हिस्सा बन सकते हैं और अपनी आवाज़ में हमद या नात दूसरों की समातों की नज़र कर सकते हैं। तो सुनते रहिए इंस्पायर FM 105.1।
May endless blessings be upon thee, O sweet and beautiful Madani. May endless blessings be upon thee, O sweet and beautiful
From the studios of Inspire FM, the time is now 7 o'clock.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to part 3 of tonight's edition of Friday Night Live with me, Abdul Akbar, and Zafar Iqbal. We've been talking about the Israel-Palestine crisis and effectively the war that's taking place in that region. I don't know about you, but if you've been affected, don't hesitate to give us a call at 01582 481 822 to discuss this topic and the next topic we're about to talk about. But I do want to point out that really interestingly, a lot of people are talking about the situation with the Al-Shifa hospital and how the Israeli government and the IDF has gone into the Al-Shifa hospital, and they're saying that there is a Hamas control center, command and control center in that hospital. However, just reading on the BBC website right now, they are talking about the fact, and one of their main reporters, Jeremy Bowen, this guy is somebody who is no stranger to war zones and conflict. He is somebody that has reported on the Iraq wars, the war in Afghanistan, so-called war on terror, when the Bush-era administration was bombing Iraq at that time. This man was there. And this man is saying that right now, I don't see any evidence to what Israel is claiming. And he is somebody that's actually gone into the Al-Shifa hospital over the last 24 hours, and he's giving this report. So it's really interesting what's coming out of a BBC journalist right now. And this is somebody who actually has connections to Israel and is somebody who has spoken very favorably of Israel in the past. He's being very, very fair here, I think, in what he is saying, but that's just one voice. We're going to hear the voice of others as well, but don't forget you can hear your voice as well on 01582 481 822. I mean, it is interesting, right, Zafar Saab, if you think about the hospital right now. I've never seen any crisis. When we heard about the Iraq war, what's going on in Afghanistan in the past, or any other war, you've never ever seen a sovereign government and its army go in and effectively shut off the supplies to a hospital. I mean, I don't know how many people saw the pictures, but apparently there were babies that were no longer in incubators, and there were people who were on life support that no longer had life support. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. This is stuff that you find in the Saw movies of fiction, but this is reality.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like Israel is playing to any international norms, to be honest, when it comes to war. There are people who argue that you know, in many ways, Israel, we talk about this as a war, and the use of sort of industrial war machine type of weapons on a civilian population. Many of them say because Israel is responsible for the security of Gaza and also the West Bank, etc., is under their control, effectively. They have no right to use them, right, as weapons of war, because in essence, they are an occupier, right, and they have in international law, they have no right to use such weapons like that on occupied people.
And there's a whole thing about collective punishment and insert lack of norm or lack of adherence to international law here. And of course, that's going to be, I'm sure, dissected and analyzed in the future post the situation, whenever the situation ends. But one other person that we heard a lot about over the last week was Suella Braverman. And we know that she was fired by Rishi Sunak earlier on in the week on Monday when he had his cabinet reshuffle, and we saw the return of David Cameron as Foreign Secretary, which is really interesting. And we saw James Cleverly, if you can argue, be elevated to Home Secretary, a very critical role in the current climate that we're in. So Rishi Sunak playing board games, clearly not to the favor of many Conservative Party members, especially on the far right of the party, which is an interesting development. But listeners, for those of you who don't know, Suella Braverman, a prominent figure in the Conservative Party, known for her firm stance on issues like Brexit and immigration, was recently ousted from her position as Home Secretary. And this move has sparked a whirlwind of discussions and debates across political and public spheres. Now, amidst this backdrop, we're seeing an intriguing mix of reactions. Now, some view this as a setback for her political career, while others speculate it might be a stepping stone towards leadership within the Conservative Party. I really hope not. Now, the political landscape is abuzz with questions about her next moves and the implications for the party's future directions. Now, tonight, we have an esteemed panel to dissect this political drama. We've got Ahmed Hussain from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, MPAC. We've got Taj Ali, a local journalist spearheading the Enough is Enough campaign in Luton, and also Basharat Ali, an analyst and commentator from Amman Solicitors, on the line. We're going to pose some challenging questions to our guests, and I'm looking forward to speaking to them. Now, let me go straight to Ahmed Hussain. Assalamu alaikum from MPAC. How are you?
Wa alaikum salam. Alhamdulillah. Always a pleasure to be here with you, brothers.
Likewise as well. And Ahmed, let me ask you, considering your experience with the Muslim Public Affairs Committee in the UK, how do you interpret the impact of Suella Braverman's policies and recent sacking on the Muslim community, and what might her leadership mean for minority rights?
Firstly, we do need to understand the wider context of her. Some people would call it reshuffling, but it is a sacking. And we have to realize that she was sacked after the Armistice Day protests for Palestine. And the context of that is really important to understand, because every argument that you could put forward about her policies around immigration, around Rwanda, around every other decision she's made as Home Secretary, that was already there before the Armistice Day protest. So what was it that suddenly meant that this week she had to finally go? And it is because that for several weeks in a row now, she had been trying to paint the Palestine protesters, the supporters of Palestine, as some kind of unpatriotic supporters and apologists of terrorism.
I think she was calling them hate marches, right?
Yeah. Ironically, considering she was the one riling up hate against British citizens, because these protesters for Palestine were all British citizens exercising our right to dissent. And over the weeks, she was the one ratcheting up the rhetoric to the point that Muslims were being attacked on the streets because the words of politicians do have power. And then the week before the Armistice Day march, it reached such a crescendo that the EDL and Tommy Robinson came out of nowhere, out of the woodwork. They were activated and set onto the cenotaph to try to make their narrative real, i.e., look at these unpatriotic supporters of Palestine having a fight around the cenotaph. However, that narrative, Suella Braverman's written narrative, was all lies, and it all collapsed. And that's why she was sacked after the Armistice Day protests on the 11th of November. Ahmed
Hussain, if you spoke to Rishi Sunak or his press representative, they could turn around and say, well, actually, it wasn't just because of that. And a lot of the press have been reporting that it was because of what she said about homelessness, and homelessness being a lifestyle choice. And David Cameron himself actually concurred with the timeline, because Rishi Sunak had been speaking to David Cameron a good week and a half before the marches took place. So it could be argued that she was sacked not because of the pressure from pro-Palestinian groups, but actually because of all the other nonsense she was coming up with that wasn't necessarily related to pro-Palestinian situations, but actually other local domestic politics that were taking place. Regardless of that, the fact is that Rishi Sunak is the person that gave her the pulpit, so to speak, and to make the kind of rhetoric that she's been making, not just against, multiculturalism and minority groups like Muslims in the UK, but actually lots of other things as well. How much to blame is Rishi Sunak in allowing Suella Braverman back? Because she basically wrote him a very scathing reply after she was sacked, calling it a resignation.
Yeah. So basically, again, context is key here. Rishi Sunak is an unelected leader of the country. He has not stood for running the country through a direct election. And in terms of taking over as leader of the Conservative Party, he only took over after Liz Truss, who was picked to run the Conservatives, her leadership collapsed. So he's not picked by the Conservatives. He's definitely not picked by the public. So when that is your starting point, is there's a real argument to be made here. Are any of his decisions legitimate? And so what he's acting as right now is basically a caretaker prime minister, because he's not going to have a mandate. His manifesto is not going to have a mandate until it's brought to the electorate and there's an election. So in terms of any point of view on is he egging on Suella Braverman or any of his other ministers? James Cleverly has been very blatantly pro-Israel when in his position as foreign secretary. All Rishi Sunak is trying to do is the only priority he has is to try to keep the Conservatives' chances of winning the next election high. And the only way he, looking at his policy decisions, his words, and his choice of language, and so on, all he's got left is blowing the racist, xenophobic dog whistles. Because in terms of policy, in terms of substance, his government over 13 years of rule has only increased community tensions, decreased community cohesion. He doesn't have anything of substance to fall back on, except to appeal to the hatred that his party has helped build up over 13 years.
Very interesting. Let me go to Bashar Ali. And Bashar, thanks for joining us on tonight's edition of Friday Night Live. And Bashar, from your dual perspective as a solicitor and commentator, I'd love your take on another policy from Suella Braverman and also Rishi Sunak, which was the Rwanda policy. And we heard about this just this week, where the Supreme Court ruled that the Rwanda illegal immigrant policy, i.e. named Stop the Boats, which is one of Rishi Sunak's 5 key pledges he made to the British people, including stopping the boats coming from Calais into Dover and surrounding areas, that was to be challenged in the Supreme Court. And those against this particular policy found that it was found to be against the law. Bashar, just take us through why it was found to be against the law, and how unprecedented is it for then the Prime Minister a few hours later, after this particular ruling was made, to then say we're going to create an emergency law so that we can send illegal immigrants out. Why are they so desperate to get rid of these people who are claiming asylum, who are in trouble situations, and send them to Rwanda? What's going on?
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for having me. There are a number of questions you proposed there, so let's deal with them one at a time. The use of race for politics is nothing novel or new to this country, to Europe, to most Muslim countries, even, to be honest with you. But particularly in Europe, if you go back 100 years, race and extreme nationalism led to horrendous results with things like the Holocaust and so on. So it's not novel at all. This shows you the depths of the gutters that they're having to reach to make immigration, and particularly asylum seekers, such a contentious issue. In terms of the numbers to Rwanda, it would have been a couple of thousand. So it's not really about substance. It's really about the whole dog whistle politics and pandering to the neo-Nazi wing of the Tory party and elsewhere. I mean, it is that far right now, to be honest with you. The things they're saying would have been untenable. Many of them, not all, but many of them are saying would have been untenable, unprecedented even 10, 15 years ago. So that's the first part. With regard to the decision, the Supreme Court found that as UK law and UK international commitments sit, because they're members of the European Convention on Human Rights, they're members of the 1951 Refugee Convention and various other international instruments which are agreed upon, and the British government has actually ratified into UK law, that the simple answer is the evidence showed that there was a substantial risk that anybody sent from here would be refouled, which is a French word for sent back or sent on to the country from where they were running away from, i.e. there was a danger they may end up being sent to some dungeon where they'll be tortured, possibly killed, and so on, depending on the facts of the case. So that being the case, the court said, fine, we're not going to accept it. And the way that you've got to understand the constitutional arrangement of the country, in a secular society where the laws are made in the name of the people, by the people, in theory at least, although ultimately it's elected representatives who are influenced one way or other to do it for various ends, the parliament is deemed to be supreme. What the parliament says is like wahi. It's like, it's basically beyond
revelation
reproach in that sense.
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, that's right. You've got to understand it conceptually. Now, because that is the way that the law works, when it's not at all unusual, the courts will find Proposition A to be unlawful. There'll be a new law passed saying, well, now that they've found it unlawful, we think it's lawful. But the problem they will have is they've got to then come up with a set of rules which they'll say are now lawful in terms of processing asylum claims in Rwanda. And then you'd have to go back to the courts. So you, as a prospective asylum seeker, refugee, through your solicitors, will say, actually, hold on a second, I don't agree. And then it goes back to the courts, and the courts will have to look at it again. And I've not heard them say they're going to, they wouldn't be able to, under the current constitutional arrangement, to shut off the courts in what's called an ouster clause. They couldn't oust jurisdiction as things stand at the moment. Never say never, because the way that law is being used and the politics of effectively migration and division, in the future, who knows? But at the moment, as the current constitutional arrangement is, they can pass laws which will say we will do X, Y, and Z again, but the courts still have supervisory jurisdiction to make sure that the laws comply with the traditions and other international conventions. Now, the UK government could, because the parliament is sovereign, can effectively pass law, or laws rather, to withdraw from all international conventions, in which case you're left with English or UK, the law of the United Kingdom. And in terms of immigration, you have the law of Scotland has a separate legal system in some respects. When it comes to immigration, there is one United Kingdom law. They could then pass various laws saying we will do X, Y, and Z. But ultimately, unless there was a monumental shift, which hasn't happened for centuries, that they were ousted the courts completely, ultimately all roads lead back to courts. And then the courts would have to determine whether or not any new law policy is in fact lawful, the laws of the realm, so to speak.
All right, thank you for sharing that. Bashar, stay there, because I want to come back to you on the European Court for Human Rights as well, because that's playing a big part in some of the circles, in the conservative circles, saying that the UK should withdraw from the European Court for Human Rights. I want to come back to you on that and ask you what that means and what the wider implications could mean beyond immigration rulings as well, but the wider implications. And if we're not part of the European Court for Human Rights, then what could that mean in other areas of law as well? So, Bashar, I'll come back to you in a moment, but let me go back to Ahmed Hussain from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee UK. Ahmed, one of the challenges I have personally, and I'm going to share a personal situation here, is that when I look at the politicians, when I look at the Labour politicians, when I look at the Conservative politicians, frankly, you can't tell the two apart. And if you look locally here in Luton and surrounding areas, a lot of the constituencies are red, and they are red because, you know, people often held the belief that Labour politicians would be more sympathetic towards minority groups, such as those from the Indo-Pak region, such as those belonging to the Muslim faith, etc. However, when we look at Keir Starmer's position, that seems to be changing. And the other thing that we can see, if we read between the tea leaves, if we do that kind of thing, or figuratively speaking, then we can see that Keir Starmer is very likely to become our next prime minister unless something radically changes in the Conservative situation and Rishi Sunak gets kicked out and someone like Suella Braverman comes in. Then that could change things again. But that's unlikely at the moment. I don't see anyone supporting Suella Braverman's enough to actually oust Rishi Sunak with a vote of no confidence. So that leads me to the question, what do we do as a community so that Parliament can best reflect our sentiment? Because at the moment, demonstrating, or at the moment, speaking about it, or even lobbying our members of Parliament isn't really making much change. Some would argue it's making some change, and that's why we've had the votes that we've had in Parliament in terms of the 50 Labour MPs or 50 MPs voting for a ceasefire. But that's not enough to get our voices heard. Are we in for a tough election next year? And should we be voting for a particular political party? And if we are posturing towards one, what should we be demanding from our MPs?
Yeah. The main thing to keep in mind is like one of the situations, one of the political opinions you're obviously referring to is the political parties' stance on Palestine and Israel. So taking that as a starting point, we have to remember that despite 75 years of occupation, the Palestinians themselves have not surrendered. If the Palestinians themselves will not give up hope of a free homeland, we who want to see a free Palestine, a free Masjid al-Aqsa, we can't surrender before the Palestinians have. So with that, from that starting point, the question has to be, what can we do as UK citizens? Obviously, there's lots of things we can do in terms of charity, humanitarian aid, in terms of alleviating the situation as it is. But we have to ask the question, what can we do as UK citizens to change the situation, to improve it fundamentally? And that answer is, one of the answers to that is our political power. Now, those of us who have not done anything, it's easy for those to say that, oh, nothing's going to change because nothing has changed yet. Has the Muslim community really organized in terms of having long-term pressure on our political decision makers? Have we really? The honest answer is no. The honest answer is no, because we have always allowed ourselves to be taken advantage of. You mentioned that Muslim areas traditionally go Labour. That's because we allow ourselves to be attracted by baubles, simple baubles, things like planning permission for our local mosque or extra funding for a local Muslim football group, little baubles like that. We have to draw the line somewhere, push the politicians to these line, and then demonstrate that there are political consequences if they don't toe that line. We need to put aside our tribal politics. We need to put aside our loyalistic politics in terms of like, oh, my uncle, my cousin, my whoever is a Labour councillor, therefore I'm always going to vote Labour. We've gone beyond that. We are seeing the blood of the Ummah being spilled, and that is being enabled by political decisions, politicians around the world supporting the Zionist state of Israel. That is the line. If a politician supports the continued spilling of Muslims' blood, it's up to Muslims to realize that this politician is no friend of yours. It doesn't matter if they're an uncle or a cousin twice removed or your best mate since you were growing up. It doesn't matter. They are allowing Muslims to be killed and the genocide to continue. So in terms of being organized, there are groups up and down the country. Obviously, MPAC UK is one. And you need to assess your local situation. If your local situation is a dead end, and there certainly are seats up and down the country that are dead ends, you might have a Conservative or a Zionist Labour or a whatever politician who's sitting on a very safe marginal. There are other seats around you that you can help, because politicians, you have to understand, they take these mental calculations into consideration when they make their personal political choices. And if there's enough of a wind of change around them, then they themselves are going to follow that wind of change as well. If it becomes politically unpopular to support Israel, they're going to give up Israel. We've seen, there's politicians, I've heard people criticize Jess Phillips, Khalid Mahmoud in the past, and then they've gone forward to vote on or even support, to vocally support, and then even to go on and vote for a ceasefire. These are MPs who, before October the 7th, people would say, yeah, they're Zionist, yeah, they support Israel. But there's been enough pressure on some MPs around the country to change their tune and even to change their votes. That pressure has to continue. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
Go
we
ahead.
definitely have to. Thank you for that. I mean, we have to definitely. I hear that, and what you're saying is that the population who are passionate about the Palestinian cause, and I would argue pro-life. If you're pro-life, you would support this. Forget about the fact that if you're a Muslim or a Jew, whatever, because there are Jews that are supporting the Palestinian case as well. So if you're pro-life, you're not going to be like Rushanara Ali or Shabana Mahmood or Tulip Siddiq, who are Labour politicians, but they did not either record a vote. I think they abstained, those three. They didn't vote for or against, and that says a lot to me, at least. But we should try and get these MPs on the line for next week and get their perspectives as well. I'm going to come to Basharat in a moment, but listeners, this is Friday Night Live with me, Abdul Akbar, and Zafar Iqbal Saab. I'm going to go ahead and thank Ahmed Hussain from Impact UK. I know we've only got you for this half an hour, so thank you for sharing your perspective. We're going to come to Basharat Ali, who is a solicitor on the line and is also a commentator on the current situation. We're going to be getting Basharat's take, listeners, on the implications of leaving the European Court for Human Rights, because that is what the far-right lobby are requesting now from Rishi Sunak. So, you know, there are centred conservative members and there are far-right conservative members. And those that follow Suella Braverman's line of politics, in other words, you know, multiculturalism has failed, pro-Palestinian marches are hate marches, cancel all the demonstrations. That's Suella Braverman speaking. And the chances are she could become the next conservative leader if Rishi Sunak does not get elected again. And the chances are he won't get elected again. But now they're saying, get rid of the European Court for Human Rights. Stay tuned. What does that mean?
This program will continue after the break. Continue listening to Inspire FM. Inspire FM.
Inspire 105.1 FM.
Top tips for this winter on Inspire FM. As the days start to get colder, the homeless and poverty-stricken will be worst affected by the cold weather. This winter, consider donating to charity to help the most vulnerable people in society. The Prophet, peace be upon him, once said, "Give charity without delay, for it stands in the way of calamity." For more winter advice, stay tuned to Inspire 105.1 FM or visit our website www.inspirefm.org.
A large and elegant wedding and events venue in the heart of Luton, catering for up to 1,200 guests, with a 5-star food hygiene rating, plenty of parking, bridal suite, family rooms and prayer facilities. Crescent Hall's the perfect venue for your wedding, events, parties and conferences. We have some great offers for summer. Contact us to find out more. Call 01582 723386. Email bookings@crescenthall.co.uk or search for us online and social media. Crescent Hall Luton. Conditions apply.
वेस्टबोर्न फार्मेसी हफ्ते के 7 दिन सुबह 9 बजे से लेकर रात 9 बजे तक खुली रहती है। हमारी सर्विसेज में शामिल हैं ट्रैवल वैक्सीनेशंस, स्टॉप स्मोकिंग, डायबिटीज चेक, बच्चों की ग़िज़ा और बहुत कुछ। लुटन और डंस्टेबल में फ्री प्रिस्क्रिप्शन, पिकअप और डिलीवरी सर्विसेज भी की जाती है। इसके अलावा आप मेडिसिन के इस्तेमाल के लिए फ्री मशवरा भी ले सकते हैं। वेस्टबोर्न फार्मेसी 198 B Dunstable Road, Luton, corner of Westbourne Road. Telephone 01582 419 432.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته وبسم الله. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: طوبى لمن وجد في صحيفته استغفارا كثيرا. That glad tidings for the one who finds in his book of deeds a great amount of istighfar.
Did you know making your heating system more efficient helps save energy and money off your bills? Here's how in 3 simple steps. 1. Reduce your boiler flow temperature to 60 degrees, saving you up to £60 per year. 2. Bleed your radiators. 3. Get your boiler service to save on future repairs. There you go. It all adds up. For more energy saving advice, visit gov.uk/save energy.
Feed the Forgotten. Through the Feed the Forgotten program, we provide people with food packs that can support a family of 5 for up to a month. Over 828 million people will face hunger. More people die in the winter than in any other seasons. Don't let them suffer. Our Feed the Forgotten program works in 12 countries. Give now and we will deliver. Call the donation hotline on 0114 365 4454 or donate via familiesrelief.org.uk.
Assalamu alaikum, this is Mariam. This is Anissa. And this is Sonia. And we are Sisters Speak. Sisters Speak is a weekly discussion program where us girls discuss a variety of topics. Just to give a few, our topics range from politics and education to social media and identity. So please join the discussion by tuning in to Sisters Speak. Tune in on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. on Inspire 105.1 FM. And also find us on Instagram at Sisters Speak.
From the studios of Inspire FM, the time is now 7:30.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to the fourth and final part of tonight's edition of Friday Night Live with me, Abdul Akbar, and Zafar Iqbal Saab. We've been talking about the Palestine-Israel conflict, and we've been asking the question, what will it take for the UK to call for a ceasefire? We had a very interesting discussion with lots of different guests. And if you do want to listen back to tonight's program, you can do so by going to Inspire FM Luton on Facebook, or also searching for Inspire FM Luton on YouTube and listen back to tonight's programs. Of course, tonight's program is being broadcast to the good people of Luton and surrounding areas tonight, and also to the good people of Nottingham, Sheffield, Derby and Peterborough, and across the Midlands through our partner stations across the UK. So welcome to all of you tuning in. This is the fourth and final part of tonight's edition of Friday Night Live. And on Friday Night Live, we try to cover the topics that are on the top of your mind as a community. And I encourage you all to listen to tonight's program. If you haven't had a chance to listen back to it, you can tune in via the channels, as I mentioned. But right now, we've been talking about Suella Braverman. She is the former Home Secretary, and she was sacked by the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak on Monday when he had his reshuffle. So lots of things have changed, including the fact that we have the return of David Cameron as well. Zafar, return of David Cameron, did that surprise you to some degree?
Massively, to be honest. I thought he was a bit of a has-been, to be honest. But
yeah.
I guess in the background, I guess he's been lobbying for some of the other sort of Asian businesses, I guess. So I guess he's within the circles and he's known within the circles. But I think what's important is the fact that Rishi couldn't find anybody, right, that he could trust within the current batch of MPs.
Yeah,
and I think it's probably because he's not been in the job long enough, right, to really get to know a lot of people. So I think he's going on safe territory.
I don't know. He's been Chancellor of the Exchequer, and I think he's bringing in David Cameron to maybe add a bit of a twist into the mix. But it seems as though mainstream Conservative Party members, especially those, well, I'll say mainstream, but those to the right of the party, are not happy because they wanted an extremist, not David Cameron.
I think he's got knives pointed at him from all directions. He just wanted somebody that he could trust. Somebody who's not ambitious, who doesn't want to be PM anymore. All right.
That's true. Yeah.
So I think he's gone for the safe option, to be honest. But talking about Suella, favorite topic of discussion on this program.
Yeah.
I was just reflecting on it, to be honest, with the there's a lot of laws, right, in which the Home Secretary has the final say, right? And I think the Nationality Act, in which I think the Home Secretary has some sort of say in terms of deporting people and withdrawing nationality from them. But having a nutter in that role means it just puts many lives at risk, to be honest, right?
Nutter, you mean someone who's divisive, not bringing the people of the country together?
Nutter, off a rocker, mad.
But the crazy thing is there's lots of people that support her.
Yes, somebody who's driven by hate, right, and emotions, not intellectually sort of rational enough.
Yeah.
Right. It just takes somebody like that, right? And then you can imagine, right? It could ruin many lives, to be honest.
I'll tell you one thing: if you walked a little bit outside of Peterborough or Derby or Sheffield and you went to rural parts of the UK, there are lots of people and in the UK that support the Suella narrative, and that's the scary thing. And coming on to that narrative, I want to go back to Bashar Ali, and I know Taj Ali's on the line as well. We've got two Mr. Ali's on the line, so grateful for that. It's the first time on Friday Night Live there. But I want to go to Bashar Ali, who's an analyst and commentator, and he's also an expert in law as well. And he's on the line right now. Bashar, I ended my last question to you with another question about the European Court for Human Rights, the ECHR. And many on the far right, I would say extremists, are actually encouraging Rishi Sunak, the Conservative leader, and our Prime Minister to actually remove the UK as a signatory to the European Court for Human Rights and as a member of the European Court for Human Rights. I'm worried about that because my concern is that if we end up with the wrong person as Home Secretary, as Zafar Saab was alluding to, then it could be that we might see more Shamima Begum type situations end up, not necessarily where the British person who was trafficked is in Syria, but actually on homegrown soil where the government is kicking people out of the country or or stripping them of their citizenships purely because they're going to so-called hate marches. I mean, is that a concern? Is that a valid concern?
As the law stands, unlikely regarding going on marches. But this is not unique to the Tories, by the way. The Blair government and after him, subsequent, I think, Brown and so on, they've been using the power to strip people of citizenship. And it's basically two-tier citizenship. Real Brits, like people who are born here of Anglo-Saxon heritage. I mean, if you go far back enough, you can send them back to Scandinavia and Normandy, because this is a country which is full of immigrants of one description or another. So it rather depends on where you draw the line, because the Angles, the Saxons, and the Normans, they all came here, as did the Celts. And the short point here is, again, it's a very politicized use of the power. In principle, I take the view, and I think that's the Islamic view as well, that once you have citizenship, it should never be taken away. People commit crimes, punish them, put them on trial, whatever you've got to do, because that's being just and fair. And Suella Braverman is perhaps the most outspoken, and by the way, she was not sacked for anything other than the fact that she never got number 10 to approve her article, and because linked to that was her egging on her mates to go to the cenotaph and start fighting with the police. She wasn't sacked for anything other than that, as far as I'm aware. I don't think focusing on personalities, to be very honest with you, it gives the green light to a rotten political setup. This is not about one person. This is the United Kingdom. The political system here does not move because you have one, what's the word, unusual or rather exceptional, sort of in terms of their politicization of the role.
Unorthodox, yeah.
I know that, because the point is not about one person. When the establishment in this country moves, I remember many years ago I met a brother from France, and he's Algerian French, and he, after Jummah, we got talking, and I was talking, and I'd covered the issue of LGBTQ and prevent and these sort of things. He said, brother, I ran away from France to the UK. Where am I going to go next? So the French, sort of, I would put it politely, they're more like the American, very harsh in terms of how they go in terms of dealing with dissent. And unlike America, where you have the right to free speech, much more protected than France, there they'll literally throw you out and ask questions later. So in summary, Braverman is the latest symptom of a political disease which has taken root in both political parties. The Labour government really ratcheted up the use of deprivation of citizenship, and the Tories carried it on. Now, with regard to the European Convention of Human Rights, I mean, basically, the Council of Europe has over about 50 members or thereabouts. There's a lot. I can't remember the exact number.
Bashar, can I come back to you on that? So we've got you for a few more minutes, but I'm sorry to interrupt you. I want to go very quick to Taj Ali, because we've only got him for a couple more minutes, and I do want to give him some airtime and question him. But Bashar, hold that thought on the ECHR.
Yeah,
I know
I've got to go as well, unfortunately. So
you're right as well. Okay. Everyone's running away. Just hang in there, Bashar. I'll come back to you. Taj, are you there? Assalamu alaikum. I'm not sure if Taj, I think we've already lost Taj Ali on the line. So Bashar, we'll come back to you again. Sorry to interrupt you. So ECHR, yeah, what's the deal with that?
Okay, the European Convention on Human Rights is ECHR, and EC small THR, the European Court of Human Rights in terms of your abbreviations. So the European Court of Human Rights effectively is a court of application. It's not a court of appeal from the UK. The final court of appeal is the Supreme Court. So you can apply direct to that court in terms of any rights which are protected. So the thing that you have is it's an extra layer of protection which the government generally most what's the word, developing tyrannies tend to want to be have the final word. So if you remove that extra layer of protection, then effectively if the UK court finds a government action to be lawful, that'll be the end of the road. And much of what Europe has in terms of the European Convention on Human Rights, you also have in domestic law already. And again, you cannot divorce law from politics. By definition, politicians make laws, politicians make policies, and the UK government, when it's challenging the courts, if you have an appeal, that obviously is on merit, and when you have no rights of appeal, it's what's called judicial review, which is much more difficult to win simply because the legal tests are different. So, kind of long story short, if you pull out the European Convention on Human Rights, and Britain helped to write the European Convention on Human Rights in 1950, after the end of the Second World War, it'll be a very dark day in many ways, but I wouldn't write it off because it's all about political posturing. At the end of the day, the political parties want to win power, and in a democracy, I think Iqbal famously said, he goes, to quote, "Jamhuriyat wo tarz hukumat hai jisme log aadmi gine jate hain tole nahi jate," i.e., in democracy you count people, not weigh them. In other words, you don't look at substance and value of something, rather you simply do a numerical exercise. But if I can get more votes by being anti-immigrant, anti-asylum seeker, anti-anything which tells me I must behave myself, I will basically pander to people, and it's a race to the bottom. And it's not just in this country, by the way. This brand of politics is all across Europe, is in the Muslim world as well, quite frankly. It's not novel. The world is lurching towards more tyranny. And where you have more tyranny, you have less legal protections generally.
That's quite scary. I mean, it's a scary picture that's being painted. And I don't expect you to have all the answers now, but if we look at the offering that's going to be available, and assuming the offering that we have in terms of political leadership is the same as when we see the next election around this time next year, because the Conservatives have to call the next election by January 2025. Traditionally, it happens around this time of the year in autumn. So we're probably going to be voting around this time next year, maybe even a little bit earlier. And the chances are on the menu are going to be two main meals, right? One is Sir Keir Starmer and his party, and the other one is Rishi Sunak and the current cabinet that we're seeing. None of them look like very wholesome meals for community members wherever you are sitting. They all look very similar to each other. Who do we vote for?
Well, look, you've got to ask a question. The choice is between a bucket with a hole in it and a sieve, and you're being asked to carry water. It's really not going to get you anywhere. Keir Starmer is a Blairite without Blair's, what's the word, charisma, but poison charisma. So, quite frankly, there is no real choice because, as you saw on the issue of Palestine, Keir Starmer's whipped his MPs, three-line whip, must not vote for the SNP amendment to the King's Speech. And what that tells you is, quite frankly, when it comes to key decisions, just to summarize it for you, it was a Conservative Home Secretary, Arthur Balfour, who signed the Balfour Declaration in 1917, the same guy who had passed anti-Jewish immigration legislation in 1905 called the Aliens Act, which effectively banned or made it very difficult for Jews fleeing persecution in Eastern Europe to come to the UK. It was a Liberal Prime Minister at the time, David Lloyd George. So the Liberals and the Tories gave away Palestine, or promised it, to Rothschild. It was a Labour Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, in 1948, who handed over Palestine and effectively allowed the Nakba to happen, with Harry Truman, who was a Democrat. You had Anthony Eden in 56, 57 with the Suez Crisis. And every government since 1917 has supported key British foreign policy decisions, because it's naive in the extreme, albeit very sincere, to think that just because a few 100,000 or a few million Muslims will vote for some people, that the foreign policy of this country would change. It doesn't happen. This is not the real world. It's the world of make-believe. Why? Because the Liberal Democrats didn't speak up much either. Why? Israel was, as they said it, I think the name of the guy who was the governor of Palestine from 1917 to 23 was a guy called Ronald Stores, S-T-O-O-R-S. He said, we want our own little Ulster. Ulster, if you're familiar with British politics, is Northern Ireland, right? When Britain changed the demographics in, I think, 7 counties, bussed in or shipped in, here you go, illegal immigrants and ships, right? People went across in boats from England and Scotland, Protestants, and changed the demographics and took the northern half of Ireland. So he was saying it's a political interest. And recently, one of the Kennedy clans was interviewed, and he said, Israel is for us like an aircraft carrier in the Middle East. So I'm just going to summarize it for you. On fundamental issues, you've got no change. On prevent, LGBTQ legislation, Palestine, Hindutva, and so on. The establishment looks at what's good for not necessarily, John, Abdullah, Sandeep, Amrit, whoever it might be in the UK, or, what they look at is what benefits the establishment and its key people. It happens to be the people in wealth. This is not a conspiracy theory, it's fact. And what helps with strategic and economic interest for Britain, in this case, and for France as well, and the US. So in my estimation, people have to make up their own minds. I quite frankly am like probably about a third of the mainstream population. Quite frankly, the choice is between a bucket with a hole in it and a sieve, and it really isn't a choice. It's an artificial choice.
Indeed.
All right,
but it's obviously it's not an argument to do nothing, right? You've got to. Yeah, I'm just gonna say it is bleak. It's not sort of a positive, but you've got to do something. To be honest, you've got to make some noise. You've got to use the system right to your advantage as best you can. Unless the system and until the system can be changed,
system ain't going to be changed. But anyway, Bashar, let's leave it there. But Bashar, all right, Jazakallah khair. Thank you, Bashar Ali. Appreciate your analysis on this. Always an insightful conversation with Bashar on the line and getting his analysis on the current situation, not just with the Home Secretary, but wider situations as well in terms of the Palestine conflict. I'm going to go to our next guest on the line. He's been waiting very patiently. Who's Taj Ali, is local journalist, and he's leading the Enough is Enough campaign in Luton. Assalamu alaikum, Taj.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thanks for joining us again on the radio. Taj, what's the current situation in terms of your campaigning on Enough is Enough? Do you feel like people are listening to the work that you're doing, and is it working? I mean, I saw the 2 Luton-based MPs voting for a ceasefire. What's disappointing, though, is that the majority of the House, I'm talking about the House of Commons, is actually still very much against a ceasefire. What's your reading of that?
I mean, I think the first thing to say is one of the reasons the MPs voted for a ceasefire is because the incredible amount of pressure put on them by the people of Luton, by the local mosques, church leaders, trade unionists, not just the Muslim community, but anyone who really cares about human rights and wants to see an end to the violence that's currently taking place in Palestine. And that is a lesson for all of us, that without organizing in our communities, without getting together, doing open letters, getting on social media, all of these small things matter. So perhaps we aren't being listened to on a national level. But I think in Luton, what we've demonstrated is if we organize and we put pressure on our local representatives, we can shift the dial on things. And, in our local campaign group, we're not just organizing on Palestine, we're organizing on universal free school meals. Prior to the local elections, our group put out 5 demands of all people that were standing for election. One of them was we would like universal free school meals for all primary school children. And the Liberal Democrat councillors were the first ones to back it. That put pressure on the Labour candidates to back it as well. And now we've got the vast majority of councillors in Luton have agreed that they are going to push for universal free school meals. Now, that was a campaign led by...
So local campaigning is working. Sorry, Taj Ali, I want to ask you this question, though, if I may, which is we saw one of the largest pro-Palestinian rallies in the current conflict last week, and I'm sure you were there, and those supporting you were there as well. But you also, I'm sure, heard about the fringe groups, the far-right extremists like EDL and Tommy Robinson coming out as well and causing problems. And as you know, Tommy Robinson and the EDL actually originate and have its origins from Luton in many shapes and forms. What went through your mind when you saw these people having and creating a counter demonstration, and what were you guiding your groups and those around you to do?
Well, I think the most disappointing thing was this hatred and misrepresentation of a peaceful protest was whipped up by the Home Secretary, the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, and by some of the journalists in many media outlets. And so we understood that this is being enabled by people from the top. There's a lot of misinformation. And we've always emphasized that the Palestinian struggle is inherently an anti-racist struggle. It's a struggle against apartheid, against occupation. We have no tolerance for any hatred. And we've always emphasized that, especially with the young people who are being politicized in places like Luton. You know, we always try to educate our young people, educate ourselves, and stay away from trouble. And I think they really embarrassed themselves because the protest took place away from those guys, and they ended up fighting the Metropolitan Police. And I think, you know, a lot of the young people that went up and a lot of the people from Luton that went to that protest, they did our town proud, they did our community proud, because we weren't getting involved in any of that nonsense. You'll always get a minority of troublemakers, but I think the vast majority of engaged with this understand you have to be very careful with the words you say and how you conduct yourself in public.
And how do you feel about when the former Home Secretary and even the Prime Minister was saying it's disrespectful to march on November the 11th, and they were saying that, you know, having these marches then is disrespectful? And what was going through your mind at the time?
I mean, let's remember what that day is meant to mark. It's meant to mark, you know, mourning the loss of life in those world wars, and that's exactly what we want in Palestine. So a march for a ceasefire does not in any way contradict those values. And you know, we had a minute silence for the day. I was in Glasgow actually on the day. I was at a conference and we had a minute silence, and I also attended the protest there, which was massive, cross community. There were actually veterans on some of these marches. So I think it was a real attempt to stir up trouble, to create a moral panic where there didn't need to be. And I think it's deeply irresponsible. You know, we know there's been a 600% increase in Islamophobic incidents since October. And, you know, whatever views you have on Israel or Palestine, you know, as the Prime Minister, as the Home Secretary, as leading journalists, we have to be very, very responsible with our rhetoric and prevent people being attacked.
All right. Well, let me thank you for your perspectives, Taj Ali, leading the Enough is Enough campaign in Luton. Hopefully not too many of these marches to come up in the future. I hope things get better and it puts people like you out of business, because that's the eventual aim, right? Is to make sure you don't need to do any marches and things are just civilized.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taj Ali. Appreciate your time. Listeners, this is Friday Night Live with me, Abdul Akbar, and Zafar Iqbal Sab. Wow, I mean, what a week. You know, what are we expecting now? I mean, we can see that situation in Palestine is not getting better. I mean, we have the IDF going into more hospitals even this evening, and it's being reported by the BBC right now that the situation is getting worse, but Israel is allowing more fuel into Gaza, as UN is saying that the aid operation is impossible. So you can see that the UN is also complaining, saying it's impossible to actually provide aid to the civilians of Gaza with the current situation that has been created with the constant bombings, with the starvation of fuel, etc. We only Allah knows what's going to happen over the course of the next few days. But I do want to say, listeners, we had some really good speakers on tonight's program, and do listen back because they have a lot of interesting insights to share. I don't know if I agree with everything that everybody said, but I've got to say that they definitely struck a chord when it comes to making sure that your members of parliaments and your elected representatives represent you. Don't sit on the armchair. Don't be somebody who's just on the grandstand watching the action, but be somebody who's actually involved in and being proactive around making sure that your voice and your expectation is made clear to your democratically elected representative. Clearly, not enough people are doing that. Otherwise, maybe we would have saw a different vote in the House of Commons. So, Saab, what's your take? I mean, what are we going to expect in the next few days? I mean, do you expect things to get worse before they get better?
Well, I think in terms of the public opinion, I think Israel's lost the war already. But, you know, apart from raising voices, unless the governments around the world put pressure on Israel, it's not going to change. And the reason it's not going to change is because of the politics within Israel itself. The fact that this prime minister was leading a very weak coalition, to be honest, of people from different diverse backgrounds.
Benjamin Netanyahu?
That's right, yeah. So he staked his political life on this war, and he has to sort of win, you know, in order to survive, and he's going to do absolutely anything right to in order to win. But I think he's lost already. I think he's lost a war already. He may be killing people, right? But you know, he's been exposed. He's exposed Israel, right? And for the first time, we're seeing that Jews from many different backgrounds in America and in the UK and around the world are actually criticizing Israel.
Yeah,
right?
that's unprecedented.
Unprecedented. That's right. Yeah.
I've not seen that before, and it's really interesting because I've had people, my neighbors, come out who are not Muslim, who are not aware of the Palestinian situation before this.
That's right.
But they've been seeing the pictures on the news, and they're also coming out.
And within Israel itself, you've seen the Orthodox Jews basically come out and waving the Palestinian flags.
There you go.
Which I think is a turnaround. And hopefully for the best, you know, because as far as I can remember, Israel's had a right-wing, nasty sort of governments previously, and it's about time they had somebody sensible to talk to.
Thank you, Saab. Listeners, we're out of time, but until next week, we'll see you then. Take care of yourselves. Friday Night Live. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.